My name is Alka Kurian. I'm an associate teaching professor at the University of Washington, Bothell. I'm a board member of the SWIR, a Seattle-based art organization whose social justice-driven mission is to amplify South Asian voices through film, literature, and storytelling. I'm actually zooming in from Morocco, where I've been spending the past 3 months. I've spent the past 3 months on a Fulbright-funded research project. It is my absolute joy and privilege to welcome you all to the third TSAL at the SWIR South Asian Lit Fest that I have the privilege of directing this year. TSAL forms part of the larger Tasveer Festival, Watch, Read, Talk, a month-long series of celebrations from October 1st to the 24th of this year. It showcases the best in South Asian film, industry panels, symposia, comedy, and of course, the best in storytelling through the written word, that is to say, through TSAL. As we all know, South Asian literature refers to the ever-expanding literary works of writers from the Indian subcontinent and its diasporas, that is to say, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. As we come together to mark this celebration of South Asian literature, we're actually struck, or I was struck by two things, and I'm sure all of us are. On the one hand, this wonderful technology called Zoom has brought us all together in one place from literally across the world. And second, we realize that the reason why we are actually using this technology is because we're still very much living the pandemic. So given these limitations and the expansive horizons that shape our contemporary world, I'd like to know, what is the place of literature at this time of the pandemic? Research shows that book sales are up. In fact, 35% of people in the world have read more books than usual since the start of the pandemic. According to author Yelena M. Alpert, a book a day can keep the pandemic stress away. And she refers to reading stories as social vaccination because indulging in fictitious worlds of other people can help us deal with the real life problems and promote well-being. So in this context, South Asian books bring to us the comfort and the joy that comes with reading stories, our own stories in our mother tongues, in translations, or in English. That is to say, books which, according to Makrand Paranjpe, books that are written by South Asian writers on their own terms and not through mimicry or ventriloquism, as they surface their voices at a time when the odds are seriously stacked against South Asian writers in the publishing world and the Western Academy. Of course, we keep winning awards and we are still underrepresented. Novels, short stories, poems, and nonfiction writing that help us make sense of the ways in which race, class, caste, religion, gender, geography, and sexuality shape the lives of people as individuals or as members of communities across our immediate and wider geographical borders. TSAL 2021 brings together authors from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and the diasporas. They'll be representing their works in a number of panels examining issues of gender, immigration, history, the poetic sensibility, LGBTQ lives, the issues of space, craft, and mood that are integral to the process of writing. But none of this would have been possible without the tireless behind-the-scene work of the staff and volunteers at the SWIR. I applaud the vision and commitment of the SWIR's co-founder and ED, Rita Meher. I'm grateful to TSAL, very grateful to the TSAL team with whom I've spent the past many months. Veena Rao, Pramila Venkateswaran, Tayyab Mahmood, Purnima Janakaranam, and Sumati Raghavan. And my very special thanks go to the TSAL coordinators, Ishita Saran and Henel Jasani, who have literally held this literary festival together. And last but not least, my sincere gratitude go to Rick Simonson, manager of the flagship independent Elliott Bay Books, for his enthusiasm for South Asian writing as he helps them promote and sell. I now turn to the panel with which we kickstart this, or kick off this fantastic festival, Space, Place, and Craft. There is no better way to see the world than through books with a strong sense of place. Sometimes a place is embodied in home, land, town, or country, but often place is an abstract spatial concept. Join 6 authors as they discuss their notion of space and how they transport readers into the world they create. So we have today with us to discuss these complexities, authors Anuk Arundpragasam, Ayesha S. Chaudhry, Meera Sethi, Nadeem Zaman, Sanjena Sathian, and Sonia Kamal. We are very grateful to Dr. Anu Taranath for leading this discussion as moderator. Dr. Taranath brings both passion and expertise to her work as a speaker, facilitator, author, and educator. A University of Washington professor for the past 20 years, she teaches about race, gender, equity, and global literatures. As a DEE and racial equity consultant, she offers coaching, training, facilitation, and other types of partnerships. Her book, Beyond Guilt Trips, Mindful Travel in an Unequal World, was named a finalist for 4 book awards, including the Washington State Book Award, and was included in Photos, Travels, 13 Books to Inspire Your Travels, and Oprah Magazine's 26 Best Travel Books of All Times. Dr. Anu and her book have been profiled in Newsweek, Yes, Afar, Bitch, Mindful, and National Geographic magazines. Over to you, Anu. Thank you.
Thank you, Alka. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, panelists. Welcome, viewers who are watching live today, as well as many viewers who will watch us after we are live and watch the recording. So a nice hearty welcome to you all. I'm going to read some bios so you can get to know who's in the room today. Because there are many of us here on the screen, when I read your bio, panelists, could you please do a little wave so we can recognize you with the accolades that I am sharing about you, please. Anuk Arundpragasam was born in Colombo, Sri Lanka. He studied philosophy in the United States, receiving a doctorate at Columbia University. His first novel, The Story of a Brief Marriage, was translated into 7 languages, won the DSC Prize for South Asian Literature, and was shortlisted for the Dylan Thomas Prize. He currently divides his time between India and Sri Lanka, and his novel, A Passage North, was just this week shortlisted for the 2021 Booker Prize. So incredible congratulations for this wonderful honor to you, Anuk. Next, we have Sanjena Sathian, a Paul and Daisy Soros Fellow. Sanjena is a 2019 graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. She has worked as a reporter in Mumbai and in San Francisco with nonfiction bylines for The New Yorker, The New York Times, Food and Wine, Boston Globe, the San Francisco Chronicle, and more. Her award-winning short fiction has been published in The Atlantic, Boulevard, Joyland, Salt Hill Journal, and the Masters Review. She's here sharing her novel Gold Diggers, which is her first book. Welcome, Sanjena. Ayesha Chaudhry is the Canada Research Chair in Religion, Law, and Social Justice, and she's the Associate Professor of Islamic Studies and Gender Studies at the University of British Columbia, where she focuses on Islamic law and theology. Ayesha is a member of the College of the Royal Society of Canada in 2019 and a fellow at the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation. She has also held fellowships at the Peter Wall Institute for Advanced Studies at UBC, as well as the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University. She is the author of 2 books, Domestic Violence and the Islamic Tradition, Ethics, Law, and the Muslim Discourse on Gender, and a book that she's sharing with us here today called The Color of God. Welcome. Next, we have for you Meera Sethi, who is an actor and a writer. Meera grew up in Lahore and attended Wesley College, after which Sethi worked as a books editor at the Wall Street Journal. Meera has written op-ed pieces for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and The Guardian. Sethi regularly appears on mainstream Pakistani drama series on television. She lives in Lahore, Karachi, and San Francisco. Welcome. Next, we have Sonia Kamal, who is an award-winning novelist, essayist, and public speaker. Her most recent novel, Unmarriageable, Pride and Prejudice in Pakistan, was named a Financial Times Reader's Best Book of 2019, a 2019 Books All Georgians Should Read, a 2020 Georgia Author of the Year for Literary Fiction nominee, and the recipient of many more honors. Sonia's work has appeared in the New York Times, The Guardian, the Georgia Review, The Bitter Southerner, Catapult, The Normal School, and more. She's taught creative writing at Emory University, Oglethorpe University, and now teaches in the MFA program at Reinhardt University. And our last panelist today that I will introduce is Nadeem Zaman, who is the author of the novel In the Time of the Others, which was longlisted for the 2019 DSC Prize in South Asian Literature and up in the main house and other stories, which he'll be sharing with us today. Nadeem's fiction has appeared in Singapore Unbound, Roanoke Review, the Wilderness House Literary Journal, Copperfield Review, the Dhaka Tribune, Dhaka Daily Star, and Bengal Lights, among other publications. Born in Dhaka, Nadeem grew up there and in Chicago. He has a BA in English from the University of Illinois at Chicago and a PhD in comparative humanities from the University of Louisville. He teaches currently in the English department at St. Mary's College in Maryland. Welcome, Nadeem. You can tell from these bios that we've got a very illustrious group of writers here today, writers, speakers, thinkers, intellectuals, and creatives. And I'm really delighted. Thank you so much, Tasveer, for inviting me to join. I'm really delighted to be in conversation with you all. Our title, of course, is called Space, Place, and Craft. And these are broad terms in some ways. They're also really specified in our writing in other ways, right? They can move us dramatically. They can also move our readers and our participants in our work, right? Depending on how we think about space, place, and craft. And so I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to share a little bit about what the first two words, space and place, mean to you in your work. Please tell us a little bit in your own words about what it is that you do and what you write about, and these two ideas, space and place, right? Sonia, we'll start with you, please.
Thank you so much, Anu, for these lovely introductions and for inviting me to be part of this Veer Festival, all of us, and to be part of this absolutely lovely panel. When I saw the topic, place, space, place, craft, etc., it was very dear to my heart and right up my alley. And I use these two cliches very deliberately because I think often emotional space and geographical space comes together to make settings in our fictional world and otherwise. And I grew up an immigrant child moving all over the place. And as an adult, continued that. I'm now an immigrant parent myself. I grew up in Saudi Arabia in the 80s and now live in the States and grew up in Pakistan, also in England and stuff. So what is heart and what is physical location has a huge role, is everything pretty much in my fiction for the most part, including the meaning of colonialism being part of the British Empire, as well as post-colonialism is what we like to call so many of the countries that you mentioned. Although I like to focus on what is post about it really. And I think that hits to the heart and the geography of both of it. And the novel of mine that is being talked about, featured today, Unmarriageable, it's actually a post-colonial parallel retelling of Jane Austen's classic Pride and Prejudice. And I've transported it to Pakistan and very deliberately given space and place. It is exactly what the novel is about because given the history of empire, I wanted to put it very nicely talk back to empire in a way and resituate the way so many empire post-colonial children have grown up in British literature, speaking English, etc., linguistically, and resituate it, take it back in a way, or at least give it new space and new geography. And I think all my work encompasses that particular identity. And then craft also comes into it, obviously, because how do we combine the two? How do we combine space and place in order to best put forth what our emotional spaces and our geographical spaces convey in the way we see the world and in the way these spaces see us also, because there's always fluidity. You know, we live in a place, or even if we visit a place, that place changes us in some way. And perhaps if we're living there long enough, we change it in some way also. And also the confluence of those two ideas and stuff is what I write about, what Unmarriageable is absolutely about. So thank you.
That's a great introduction to your work. Thank you so much, Sonia. Anuk, please tell us a little bit about what you do in your own words and these notions of space and place for you, please.
Thanks, Anu, for that introduction. It's lovely to be here. I'm a novelist, and I've just published a few months ago my second novel, A Passage North, which is set in Sri Lanka in the years after the end of the Civil War. And I guess in many senses, it is about space or place. So I'm not sure how to distinguish those two exactly. I guess I think of space as something more conceptual, or as something that is more socially constructed. But the novel is about a young Tamil man who travels from Colombo in the south of Sri Lanka to the north of the country, to the former war zone, to attend the funeral of a woman who used to take care of his grandmother. I grew up in Colombo in Sri Lanka, and I'm Tamil, and my parents are from the north, from a village right at the tip of the country. But I was only really able to visit my ancestral village for the first time in my life when I was 20 years old, because of the war, there was really no movement back and forth. And in the few periods in which there was, it was very difficult to move. So growing up, there was this kind of distinction in my mind, more of a dualism, a kind of metaphysical separation between south and north, that in my mind was not a kind of this was not a border or boundary that could be transgressed. And this novel, as I was saying, it takes place after the end of the war, and the main character, who is kind of from a similar class and caste and socioeconomic background that I'm from, makes this journey. And it's a journey to a place that he has spent all of his life imagining, that he's spent all of his life reading texts about, looking at pictures of, looking at maps of, and because he spent so many hours of his life watching videos of violence taking place in that place, it's really a kind of place that he's constructed. And so as he travels north physically, he has this kind of vivid sense that he's traveling somewhere in the outskirts of his mind, that he walks when he's walking across the Northeast, because he's walking on a site of genocide. He treads very lightly, as if, in the way that one would tread in a cemetery or a cremation ground, although none of the people who live in those spaces treat them in these ways, because the place, this imagination of the place is very much superimposed over everything he sees and hears while he's there. So the novel, it really is about this movement from imagined places to real places, or across spaces in which the imagined has been superimposed over the real. And I guess it's very much a reflection of my relation to this place that I had to imagine all of my life.
Thank you. It sounds like there's so many links between this notion of what is conceptual that, of course, pulls us emotionally, and what is then physical and tangible. And actually, all of your work is negotiating these concepts, right? Yeah. Meera, thanks, Anuk. Meera, please tell us a little bit about you and conceptual, physical, space, place. How does that play out in your work?
Sure. Thank you, Anu, for moderating and for those generous introductions. So I wrote a collection of short stories called Are You Enjoying, which was published in April in the US and then May in the UK and in India. And the collection has 7 stories. One is about an actress on the set of her first major TV show. One is about the wife of a politician who sort of wants to carve out a path for herself. So she's sort of ambitious. 2 of the stories actually center on the politician's wife. One is about an affair between an American diplomat and a Pakistani TV presenter. The title story, Are You Enjoying, is about a relationship between a kind of this woman who's sort of addicted to Xanax, who's having an affair with her gym trainer. And one story is about 2 friends who agree to marry each other in order to keep their sexualities a secret. So after I finished writing this book, I later realized that in many ways, I've kind of written a book of secrets. These are sort of, I don't know if I'd call them light, but they are stories that you often don't hear about from Pakistan. So in many ways, they are Pakistan, I guess, with a lowercase p, because the Pakistan that we, or maybe that you hear about is, a Pakistan that is a failing state. And there are a lot of, we see what's happening in Afghanistan next door, and we have our own problems in Pakistan with terrorism and bombs and so on. And the 2 most famous women to have come out of Pakistan are Benazir Bhutto and Malala Yousafzai. Benazir Bhutto, who was assassinated by the Taliban, and Malala Yousafzai, who was shot in the face by the Taliban. So people know that story. And so I wanted to write this book rooted in the local. And I wanted the subjectivity of my characters to shine through. My stories are set in Lahore, Karachi, and Islamabad, and 2 in the fictional town of Maujpur, which is modeled on a sort of town in central Punjab in Pakistan. And for me, space and place are crucial because I really love literature that is rooted in the local. I think universalist literature, whatever that is, flattens out complexity, it flattens out nuance. And when reviewing my book, somebody in the Hindustan Times or the Hindu wrote that the book is so local, Meera Sethi's book is so local that it would really only actually be appreciated or understood by people who've either visited Pakistan or who have a sense of Pakistan. And then he went on to say some nice things about the book, but that I was very happy to read that, because I think as a non-Western writer, you have to ask yourself a question early on in your career, which is, above all, do I want to be a bridge maker to the West? And above all, do I want to be understood and explicable to the West? And I have been published in the West, and I'm very grateful that I have an audience there. But to me, the subjectivity and authenticity and the voices of my characters were very important. There are a lot of Urdu words in my short stories. At one point, a character says to another, have you forgotten all about your majazi khuda? Now, I could have translated that to say, have you forgotten all about your God in earthly form? But can you imagine how that would have come across in dialogue? So I've taken a lot of decisions to stay rooted in the local. And, I think that in South Asia, that's resonated with people. I actually think in the West, it's maybe, I don't know if people have Googled terms or stuff. I don't know. But I do think after 9/11, there was a demand for writers, certainly from the AvPac region. I remember that awful shorthand coinage for us to explain, Islam, for us to explain terrorism. I don't burrow inside the mind of a jihadist, right? Like, I'm writing about love affairs, I'm writing about people living their realities. And so I feel very strongly about this. And for my debut, I really wanted it to come from a raw place. And so I just wrote about local lives.
Mm. Yeah, great. Thank you for that. I want to definitely, as we continue this morning in conversation, think about who are we writing for and whose responsibility is it to translate what? And I mean less about just particular words and more about local lives. That I love the review that you shared. The local life is so specific, and yet who is it supposed to speak to, right? That's something that let's certainly bring up again. Thank you. Sanjena, please share a little bit about your work and how you relate to these conversations, please.
Yeah, thanks so much for hosting and for moderating. I was born and raised in the US, so the place that my first novel, Gold Diggers, engages with is primarily America. And I think I have been interested in the way America narrativizes itself, the sort of mythology of the US, which was really how I came to understand America, was sort of through the Gatsby dream. And so my novel is about Indian Americans, but I think the place it engages with most fundamentally are some of the ugly corners of America, the suburbs of Atlanta, Georgia, where I grew up, the sort of bleak strip malls, and the sad suburbs of Silicon Valley as well. The novel follows a teenager at the start and then later in his 20s who is sort of a burnout underachiever, and who learns that his best friend has been stealing gold from other Indian Americans and sort of converting that gold into this magical elixir that allows them to seal the ambitions of the kind of original owners of the gold. It's this magical realist sort of device that I've used to satirize the community's kind of addiction to ambition and achievement culture. But that sort of weird, zany little magical object that I threw into my fiction is really a way of explaining to myself first, not really to an audience, but sort of exploring for myself what is required to make oneself at home in America, and in the kind of particular corner of the Indian diaspora where I grew up, very suburban, predominantly Hindu, predominantly dominant caste. That kind of worship of wealth, power, achievement was both kind of funny and ambient, but also very, very real, and that it was sort of the way that people tried to plant roots in American soil. And so the sort of engagement, the way I've engaged with America is through kind of a highly specific experience of my community. But I'm a big believer that it's through hyperspecificity that you access the universal. And so I hope that the novel is saying something larger about the US. And it also says a few things about India. There are sections set in the 1980s where everyone is sort of scrambling to get to IIT. But yeah, I think engaging with the mythologies that we overlay on top of a country as new immigrants was kind of front of mind for me when I was writing Gold Diggers.
As I was reading your novel, I kept on thinking, what would it have been like to have been a younger person in this country and know that the narratives of our community could be satirized, could be critiqued, could have some questions asked of it, because I didn't know that as a younger person. Of course, I peddle in critique now, but to even know that there is something called critique of the dominant narrative, that I didn't know that at the time. And I think, and I'm actually, as I'm articulating this, thinking of your novel, I'm really seeing parallels to so many of the work of many of you here. So maybe that's something that we can also talk about this afternoon. Thanks, Sanjena. Nadeem, please tell us a little bit about you and space and place.
Anu, thank you. Thank you for moderating, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. I'm really honored. This is quite an eminent league of writers that I'm with here. You know, space in I guess is something that I'm still trying to define, as in, you know, what space do I occupy as a writer? who is of, Bangladeshi heritage, a Bengali, who lived the first 15 years of my life there. And then the last 30 lived in the US. And so, which space is mine? Which space do I belong to? Is a continual kind of search. And how that connects with writing is, first of all, when I was first writing my earliest stories, especially after moving here, I didn't know what to write, and so I was kind of just doing what is kind of a novice writer, I guess, tool to use, is to kind of emulate the people I was reading and I admired, and in that space, I was not writing characters that had anything to do with Bangladesh, that had anything to do with even being South Asian or brown or Muslim or anything that I'm attached to. And then that changed. And really one of the best fleshed out product of that is this book, Up in the Main House, which is a collection of my stories over several years, which actually came out after my first novel, In the Time of the Others, my debut novel. And so space is still in flux for me. Where do I belong? Where does my work belong? I am in label obsessed America. I guess I could be anything from a Bangladeshi American author to an American author of Bangladeshi descent, a Bangladeshi author who lives in America. I don't know. I could have a new identity as a writer every day. And yet my book may not belong anywhere. It may not belong in an industry, obsessed with selling, mainstreaming, and at the same time, somehow Up in the Main House ended up getting a US publication because it was first published in Bangladesh by the Bengal Lights Publications, no longer around, and they had a partnership with Unnamed Press, and they forwarded it. So I'm still doing this circuitous search for a space on a bookshelf in the US that will mainstream my books. It's gotten nowhere, and I'm fine with it because clearly I have a readership, which is the reason I'm in a place like this, and I keep enjoying the work that I do. And the place has, for several years now, has been Dhaka. Yes, it's Bangladesh as well, on the larger canvas. But Dhaka was the city where I was born. It's the city that I left unexplored and a longing to find out more. But I left at the age of 15. And then I went back in 2017 and spent a year there, really exploring it to the best of my ability, as I was not able to when I was a child. So, and that Dhaka is what I try to unpack, both from these memories that I have of being born into wealth and privilege, and also trying to kind of put my ears and eyes to stories that I wouldn't know of people that I'd literally never heard their voices, whether it was the nannies and the buas and the ayahs taking care of us, or, the rickshaw driver and the baby taxi driver and our drivers, so in this upstairs, downstairs kind of dichotomy, that became the heart of this collection of stories. And they continue to be in works that I'm doing. And just as a preview, my upcoming novel next year is also set in Dhaka. It's called The Inheritors, and it's an adaptation of The Great Gatsby set in Dhaka, in modern contemporary Dhaka. So that is the place that now occupies all my writing energies and all my writing explorations. America shows up, specifically Chicago, which is where I spent 20 years of my life, and I love that city. But it is still making its way gradually, and so far has only existed in bits and pieces as needed in stories. So Dhaka is still the obsession.
I really like that concept of what shows up in our writing, as well as where our books show up on a bookshelf, or in which publication, or to which readership, right? We are showing up not only to ourselves throughout our lives, but we're showing up to readers in different ways based on how they consume us, how they are introduced to us, right? There's a lot of nuance there that I'm thinking about from your comments. Thanks, Nadeem. Ayesha, please, a little bit about you and your voice to this conversation.
Thank you so much for moderating this panel, Anu, and thank you for inviting me to be on it. When you asked us to think about space and place and how it relates to our work, the word that came to my mind immediately was home. And in many ways, the book, The Color of God, I'm exploring my relationship to home and the yearning for home that everyone around me is sort of involved in. And I was born in Canada to Pakistani immigrant parents who embraced a very fundamentalist form of Islam and were very anti-assimilationist. So they were kind of rejecting the space and place that they found themselves in. And that affected the way that they raised their children in various ways. One of the ways that I trace in the book is that it meant that, I wore hijab since I was 5 and a niqab for 10 years, from grade 10 to the end of my master's in public high school and university in Toronto. As I was thinking about home, I was also thinking about this quote from the poet Patrick Rizal, who's Filipino American. He writes that in cultivating a practice of paying attention to the world, he noticed, quote, "The closer I paid attention to that world, the more I saw my parents' lives, their wishes, their secret delights, their immense sorrows, the puzzling circumstances of our family and cultural history. I often saw these things in fragments, but I did begin to see our story. I started to make meaning." And, perhaps all writing is a way of making meaning of our lives and in the world. And that's certainly true for this book. One of the questions I'm asking in the book is home a place, or is it a set of relationships? So can you have a place without having a space? And especially, this feels like an especially important question, I think, for those of us who are in diaspora, because in our search for home, we often end up claiming belonging to places and spaces and structures such as nation states, et cetera, that make us complicit in all sorts of violences. So I'm deeply interested in the question of how so often claims to belonging make necessary certain kinds of violences. And then the other thing I'm thinking in relation to that is that, one of the lies of Enlightenment thinking and free market capitalism and the nation state is that we are discrete individuals cut off from everybody else, but actually we only exist in relationship to others and really a multitude of others. So in light of this, the book is examining the sorrows of displacement. I talk about the double diaspora from India to Pakistan and then Pakistan to Canada, but also I'm really wanting to explore the fullness of life that can be found in what Anna Singh might call the ruins, or Christina Sharp would call the wake, or Saadia Hartman would call the afterlife of the colonial wreckage. So the question that I'm really interested in, and that the book sort of leads us to, is how can we have a sense of peace where we are? And is it possible to have a sense of joy and peace without strictly belonging anywhere?
And how complicated that is when our definition of home, peace, struggle, belonging looks different across even our families, across the generations. My parents, like some of you, are immigrants from India to the United States, and their sense of home and place and loss and joy shaped me. And it's also been a space for me to grow into, and also grow from, and stretch out of, and stretch into, right? And I'm seeing that a lot in The Color of God in your book, Ayesha. There's so much of that that you're exploring in your book. Thank you. It's so nice to hear a little bit from each of you. Let's keep digging in, and let's hear from you specifically with the work that you're sharing with us today. Mira, let's start with you, and could you please read a little bit from Are You Enjoying, and share with us why you are choosing this small section to share with us today.
Sure, I would be delighted to read from Are You Enjoying? And I am mostly reading from I'm going to read from Breezy Blessings, which is about the actress on the set of her first major TV show, because it has a little bit of dialogue. And because I am a professional actor, I thought I would subject you guys to my terrible acting skills.
Good.
And so I'm going to read two passages. This is a 2 to 3 minute reading, one from the beginning and then from the middle of the story. How many girls from good families have gone into this line of work? I'm not the type of mother who says, sit at home. Do something decent, I say. Now look at your sister. I'll marry whomever you want me to marry, Mehak said. All day I'll be left alone with this useless man, her mother said, unafraid of her wounding candor about her own husband, who sat at the edge of the sofa, stirring sugar into his tea. Mehak's father did not look up. Afterward, he went into Mehak's room and took her hand in his own. Mehak looked at his hand, strewn with black wisps of sideswept hair. He smiled and told her not to worry. It was her first lead role, and there was no doubt in his mind she should take it. One day, when she won Best Actress at the Jeet TV Awards, he would give the speech. I love you, Abu Jan, she told him. She returned the director's call as her father looked on. It sounds perfect, sir, she said on the phone. I'm over the moon. I've been a fan of yours for so long. She tapped the speakerphone button. Oh, so sweet of you. And feeling is totally mutual. I wanted someone sweet, even a little bit shy. The story is a little violent, nothing serious, just a few slaps. Mehak said it would be her honor. She looked at her father and shrugged. And now I'm going to read from the middle of the story when Mehak is coming, well, the director takes her to a party and then he tells her that he will drop her home. And she says, okay. And they are in his SUV. And now I'm going to read from that section. I love the yellow vanilla inside, said the director. Ever since I was a child, it's so hard to find nowadays. Ditto, sir, same. She tore open the ice cream. Every time you call me sir, I feel like a 70-year-old uncle. He smiled as he reversed the car. Don't be so formal. Just shahab. Eat it or it'll melt. Yes, sir. She blinked. Sorry. She laughed. He chuckled gloomily. She slid a cracked piece of chocolate onto her tongue and into her mouth. Acting is all about the eyes. Now say my name softly. At the same time, say it with complete confidence. She whispered his name in a low voice, looking at him. Not bad. The roads were wide and clear and blue. Nice car, she said. 10 years of my savings. But what an honor to have such a pretty girl sitting in it. He placed a hand on her thigh. My friend at the party was saying as well, most actresses don't have the kind of screen presence you have at such a young age. It's the eyes. Are they from mama or papa? I think Abbu. He rolled his knuckles over her jeans. Mashallah. Always say mashallah. She drew her leg away. Learn how to take a compliment, he snapped. She looked straight ahead. He cleared his throat. I want to help you, Mehak. Frozen, she looked ahead. The car was moving. I don't know how long I read for, but I could go on, but I think I'm out of time.
Oh, that's great. Tell us why this scene is something that you wanted to share with us.
So, to be very honest, it's a very banal and stupid reason. I've been doing readings now for more than 6 months, and I find that the passages where I don't have dialogue, they're just lost to the audience. Mm-hmm. And I have passages that are beautiful and kind of set the scene and so on, but I just like reading dialogue because it's hard to follow. Mm-hmm. So that's the genuine, honest answer. Mm-hmm. And then, I think this is Breezy Blessings is my only story with a kind of complete, satisfying ending. I tend to write anti-epiphanies, and in this story, after he sort of hits on her, is creepy with her, she kind of has a loss of innocence, and then she sort of uses social media to get even with him. And so in this scene, I'm showing how he's sort of using religion to justify his creepy behavior, and how religion is sort of it's in the air, it's so pervasive that we just don't critically analyze it at all in these types of interactions. So for that reason, and yeah, it's just fun to read, to be honest.
Well, all your acting skills beautifully shine. So thank you for that. Thanks. Ayesha, please share a little bit from Color of God with us.
Okay, so thank you for that reading, Mira. That was really beautiful. I'm completely hooked, and I need to read your book. This is a excerpt from, it's like the end of the chapter in a chapter called Theft, and the chapter starts with a lesson, a child is being taught a lesson about stealing and what theft is. And so this is where this chapter goes to. I have only two memories of my grandfather, both from family trips to Pakistan. In one, he's in a bed in one of the rooms in my mamu's portion of the house. The room is painted a light shade of green. It is a house that my grandfather claimed after partition. He fled to Pakistan from India with his family, leaving behind farmlands, cattle, and a haveli, a compound of houses, immovable wealth. Apparently, the way it worked during partition was that if you survived the massacres in your hometown, escaped the knives of your neighbors, jewelers, butchers, and school teachers, once friends now turned enemies based on lines drawn by white men over lunches in posh rooms. If you survived the violence along the way, on the roads and train stations, stations turned for a little while into battlefields and slaughterhouses, running red with rivers of blood. If you finally made it to the place where you were supposed to be, which was not your home because that had been left behind, but the place where it had been decided by the people who would never be called thieves, that you'd have to start your life over, then what you would do is find an empty house, another displaced family's home, and move into it and claim it as your own. Finders keepers, post-partition, displacement, and massacre. The house my grandparents settled into is a large home that used to belong to a Punjabi, Hindu, or Sikh family. We know this because it was abandoned. My grandfather claimed it. Growing up, I heard this was a wealthy family's house, evidenced by the fact that they left behind an entire trunk full of chocolates. Now the house is partitioned in two, as my grandfather lies weak, ill, and dying, surrounded by his children and grandchildren in a room in a part of the house that two of his 7 sons live in. The other half is occupied by another son. The son split the house in two, and the partition was not amicable. The brothers fought over portions of the house, each feeling cheated out of their fair share. And the 3 who claimed the house, 2 in one section and 1 in the other, screwed their remaining siblings, including my mother, out of their rightful claim over a house the family barely had a claim over to begin with. I'm not sure how old I am in this scene. Maybe I'm 5. The white-bearded, light-skinned, frail man on the bed, my grandfather, is dying. Some people are weeping, speaking in hushed tones. There is a sense of great importance in the room. Something is about to happen. I'm not there when it does. I'm told that just before he died, he smelled blossoms, asking, where are all the flowers coming from? There were no flowers in the room. This is a good sign. The smell of flowers means he's headed to Jannah, the garden, paradise, encountering its smell before its sight. He smelled heaven while he was still alive, in the liminal space between life and death, when he could still communicate, when he could still tell us, there are flowers in paradise, I smell them. The next time I see him, he is dead, his washed body lying on a charpai. There's a huge slab of ice the size of a coffin beneath the charpai, cooling the body from below so it doesn't rot. The body, the charpai, the coffin-sized block of ice are in the courtyard of the house. I think it's summer and early evening, so likely about 7 p.m. Some of the adults are wailing. My mother's sister brings me close to the body. Go ahead, look at him. He's your nana, your grandfather, your mother's father. The words for maternal and paternal grandfather are different in Urdu, nana and dada respectively. The difference between these grandfathers is significant. You have different claims over each. They have different kinds of power over you. Go ahead, look at him. He's your nana. Even now, as I remember or manufacture this scene, I am aware that she means to convey something important to me, but I don't get it. Not then, not now. What is she trying to tell me? Maybe she wants me to know where I'm from, my maternal lineage. Maybe she's just overcome with grief and this encounter has nothing to do with me. That's more likely. This is about her. But I don't know that when I'm 5. And more than 30 years later, I remember that exchange, but I doubt she has any recollection of it. I go into a dark back room off the courtyard, crossing into another section of the house, and hang out with my cousins who are also children. We discuss, try to process what has just happened and how we should behave. Our grandfather just died, says one cousin. We should be sad, says another. Let's cry, suggests a third. Good idea, we agree. So we try to make ourselves cry, mimicking the adults, forcing feelings of sadness I don't actually feel. After all, I never had a relationship with this man who has just died. This man named Asadur Rahman. Beautiful name when you think about it. Not the lion of God, but the lion of the merciful. A name that holds opposites, that imagines fierceness and mercy together at once. As I think back on this strange memory of being in a dark room that feels like a cave, the walls made of stone and brick, stone and brick, moisture seeping through them so the room feels damp, pretending to be sad, fake crying at the death of a grandfather I never knew, I wonder, is this the first memory I have of feeling like a fraud? I wonder too, can grief be stolen? What I'm really asking is, can grief be owned? There's a contested story about the British East India Company involving the thumbs of Bengali weavers. According to oral accounts, the thumbs of Bengali weavers were cut off by the British to prevent them from competing with the East India Company in the textile trade. But a written account by a colonialist himself states that the East India Company's labor practices were so horrific that Bengali weavers cut off their own thumbs rather than allow their labor to be stolen by the British. Where does the truth of the missing thumbs lie? In the oral history of indigenous peoples or the written history of colonizers? Memories too, it turns out, can be stolen. In the episode of the hatchet, I was never physically hurt. The mere threat of violence was enough to put the fear of God in me. The fear of God can be more merciful than the fear of the state. God can be shaped and reshaped by us, but we are helpless before the state. And it worked. I learned the lesson I was supposed to, that people and things can be owned, that some people own more things than others, that ownership is virtuous, and even more, it is a protected right. Taking something that someone else claims ownership over is called theft. It does not matter how little you have or how much they have, or how they came by what they have. Taking it is a crime and a sin. The crime is both moral and legal. Laws, religious and secular, punish the thief. The punishment is often physical, whether it involves cutting off a hand or confining you to a cage, stealing years from your life. I learned this lesson living on stolen land stolen by Europeans from indigenous peoples whom they mistook as Indians and then called Indians anyways, stealing their identities, their names, their land, their kin, their children, their language, teaching us that what is not owned can still be stolen. So the lesson I learned was this: the powerless have only a merciful God to rely upon, whereas the powerful can rely on the mercy of the state.
That's a really wonderful passage for you to read today. Thank you. Why is this the passage you wanted to share with us?
Well, I think it was bringing up a lot of these questions about space and place, and it was thinking about home, and I think it captures the layered experiences of how we negotiate who we are and how we belong to the people we belong to.
I love the way that you've kind of really raised the stakes about what is manufactured, what is remembered, what is forgotten, all the way from the violence of partition, the violence of stolen land, stolen children. And what does that mean for the ordinaries of you and I, and the very specific local moments that we are navigating, the death of a Nana, the assault of somebody more powerful, touching our jeans in a car. I mean, any of these moments, right, are about what is remembered and what is not.
Yeah.
What is said, what not. Right. Yeah, thanks. That's really beautiful. Thank you. I also really enjoy the kind of matter-of-factness of your writing. There's something just so matter-of-fact about it, but in that matter-of-factness, I found myself having to pause every few sentences and think, oh, this is theft. This is theft. This is unspoken theft. That doesn't end, right?
Yeah.
So that juxtaposition of how you write and what you're writing about, I found really rich. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Nadeem, please share with us something around Up in the Main House.
So I will read from the story called The Father and the Judge. And that about sums up the, as far as character-wise, what's going on. And the father is from the village from which the judge's people hail in Bangladesh. And he's come to ask a favor only a man in power can give him. And I'll get more into it post the read. So this is from The Father and the Judge. The father arrived before dawn. He accepted a glass of water from the servant boy, and after drinking all of it in one gulp, stood by the main gate, gazing wistfully at the ground. He was a middle-aged man in good health, tall and slender, white hair combed back, bristly white eyebrows over curious eyes, full lips the color of plums. His typed letter had come by post a week ago. Now the judge wished he could take back his response, agreeing to see him. He was from the village in Sylhet, where the old Qureshi mansion still stood. For years, the landlord, A.R. Qureshi, had lived in the house and overseen the family lands, and the tenants who lived under his protection answered to him. Back then, it was common knowledge that all matters, large or small, in spite of being under the jurisprudence of the erstwhile village council, presently the bureaucratic stranglehold, known as the Zilla Parishad, ultimately required a Qureshi stamp. Now no Qureshis remained in the village. The house was locked up. The judge had paid the place a visit shortly after the landlord's death, found it dismal, and had no reason to want to return. His third cousin, Wasim Qureshi, had taken the mansion under his charge, along with a bungalow and small tea factory in Srimangal. The servant boy brought tea and set it on the cane table. The judge asked if the man had said anything, asked for food or had been given any, but the boy shook his head. He told the boy to fetch the letter from his office. The judge waved a hand at the father, realizing as the man began making his approach that he knew his name from his letter, Shamsher Ali. The man had signed it in Bangla. He stopped a few feet from the edge of the steps that went up to the veranda and salaamed the judge, but did not make the customary attempt to touch the judge's feet in obeisance. The boy returned with the letter. The judge took a sip of tea, set down his cup, and lifted the letter. "How did you find my house?" he asked. Shamsher Ali cleared his throat, which the judge found perfunctory. "In the village, people know your family better than their own household," he answered. Without taking the letter out of the envelope, the judge referred to it. "All this is true?" Shamsher Ali rolled his shoulders, let out a breath, and peered at the judge from under his fierce brows. What kind of father would make up such things about his daughter? The judge tapped the edge of the envelope on the back of his wrist. "I've read the letter. Now you need to tell me in your own words what happened and what's still happening." "All my own words, Shahib, are in the letter," said Shamsher Ali. "Why did you have it typed out in English and not write it by hand by yourself? You sign your name well enough. My writing is too crude for a man of your level. I wanted it to look and sound right. I had it prepared professionally. Besides, everything official is done in English." It must have cost him no small amount, and technically, the words were not purely his, but their transcribed, translated versions generated by the typist. The judge sipped his tea and nodded. "Wasim Shah has helped me and my family out many times," Shamsher Ali continued. The judge wondered if it was his way of pitting one family member against another in a bid for supremacy of charity. "Then why not go to him?" he asked. "I need the law, Shahib, to protect my daughter." After a silence, he said, "The truth is, Shahib, I didn't go to him. Wasim Shahib, he told me to write to you." The judge hid his surprise at this. A good 10 years had passed since he had last seen his cousin. Their acquaintance, formed late in life, had always been distant, formal, not familial, because of the myriad circumstances spinning within family relations that can keep third cousins implicit strangers. "Did you bring your daughter with you?" Shamsher Ali's gaze dropped to the ground. His hands moved around to his back and gripped each other at the base of his spine. "She's safe," he said, "for now." The story Shamsher Ali told the judge, speaking slowly and methodically, rather a bit too methodically to the judge's chagrin, was that his daughter had been married 3 years to a man who had progressively degenerated into a tyrant. It wasn't always so. Shamsher Ali was quick to point out, As a prospective groom, he had showed plenty of promise, which at the time the marriage was arranged included a job lined up in the Middle East. The first year and a half of marriage went as smoothly as could be expected. Shamila, the daughter, the alleged adulteress, had no complaints. But by the end of the second year, Shamila had had no children and village gossip began spreading. A visit to a doctor in Sylhet proper proved it was not Shamila's inability to conceive. Before long, the gossip pegged the husband as being impotent, and so began his unwinding. Shamila endured the beatings, shrugged off the bruised eyes and cut lips. Shamshir Ali was not one to interfere, but the girl's mother was unabashed in her probing of her daughter for details, deeming the gossip circulating over the girl's head a liability. The judge held up a hand. You've come all this way to tell me of village gossip? Sounds like you have your answer from the doctor. If that was indeed what was causing the problem, Shamshir Ali said nothing, made no claims justifying his story, no refutations, and waited respectfully to be given permission to go on. On a few occasions, Shamila was found unconscious and alone, her screams the night before not having drawn any of the neighbors or her in-laws to her rescue. Shamshir Ali approached the boy's father and was shunned. The man accused Shamshir Ali of lying about his daughter, of dumping her onto his good and capable son, casting an evil eye over the boy's future and wanting to leech off it, and now dragging his family's name through the mud. City doctors be damned, the boy's father had roared, for no other reason than to make sure Shamshir Ali's humiliation reached as many ears as possible. His son was noble and pure and in perfect health, and it was his birthright to run his house the way he saw fit. No one less than the Almighty and his prophet, peace be upon him, reserved rights of censure. Was it the boy's fault Shamshir Ali's loins had contributed to the world a defective girl? They should have drowned her at birth, saved themselves a lifetime's worth of trouble. And to top it off, she was a whore. No respectable whorehouse would employ a defective whore. On and on the boy's father berated him until Shamshir Ali shrank from the heat of 1,000 villagers' eyes burning into his skin. The village elders were no better. They chastised Shamshir Ali for creating a stir, for bringing shame on the village, disturbing its peace, and for meddling in other people's affairs. His daughter belonged to her husband and his family. She should be left to her fate. How did Shamshir Ali not know this? The judge wanted to hear what that fate was. He wanted to hear it from Shamshir Ali. Shamshir Ali's hands unclasped behind his back and pressed together at the level of his chest. My child, Shahid, I'm begging you for her life. Don't beg. I didn't agree to hear you beg, certainly not for anyone's life. Shamshir Ali's hands dropped to his sides. What about this business of adultery? The judge asked. They are saying so, Shahid. Based on what? Gossip? I don't have the patience to hear about gossip. I don't care what your village elders listen to. Gossip is trash, and those old men should know better. On my child's soul, Shahid, based on nothing but lies spread by her husband and his people. Where is your daughter now? In a safe place, Shahid. For the second time, the judge wearily accepted his reply. Listen to me very closely, he said. When you bring a petition to a court of law, the first thing you have to do is state everything, absolutely everything, clearly. No detail is too small. If you hold back, you only hurt your case. I've been doing this long enough to read people before they open their mouths. You're an honest man, I see that. But even the best of our intentions get clouded by emotion. It's human, it happens. I said, I've read your letter more than once, and each time I've been left wondering what is not in it. Why don't you tell me what the letter has left out? Shamshir Ali buried his face in his cupped palms. The backs of his hands were crisscrossed with scars, the fingers bony and robust, the yellowed nails jagged and cracked. The judge sipped his tea. Later that day, as chairman of the International Crimes Tribunals, he would listen as the chief prosecutor and other state investigative agencies brought charges against Mullah Khudabakhsh, a Jamaat-e-Islami hardliner who had allied himself with the Pakistan Army in 1971 and led them to the doorsteps of Bengalis to be rounded up and killed. Shamshir Ali's hand slid off like a mask to reveal his face. She will not just be ruined, Shahid. Her life is in danger. Ruined. Her life, Shahid. His hands brushed over his heart again. The judge placed the letter on his lap and tapped a finger on it. Why ruined? My wife is still in the village. She is also in danger, but it's our home, and her people are nearby too. 3 generations it's been our home. My forefathers and me, we have eaten your salt. What about your people? Shamshir Ali shook his head. No, Shahid, they want nothing to do with this. So your wife is making sure your 3-generation-old home doesn't disappear while you're here trying to save your daughter's life from ruination and death, and the girl is supposedly somewhere safe. If you were in my place, what would you think of your story? The already long day was growing even longer. Your family has been like God to us. Nonsense. How long do you plan on being here, keeping your daughter in her safe place? Nobody will come near her if they know she has your family's protection. The boy brought out the cordless phone. The judge took it, listened, nodded, and spoke once. He returned the phone to the boy when he was done. The boy slipped back into the house. I have to go now, he told Shamshir Ali. In the meantime, think about what I've said. After a pause, he said, come back in the evening. Thank you.
Shamshir Ali's humility and humiliation is what strikes me from this passage, right?
Yeah.
Why did you want to share this part with us from your short story collection?
First of all, this story has a special place in my writing world because it was the first piece that received a major publication in the Roanoke Review. Second, I think it really encapsulates some of the main themes running through the entire book, as well as through so much of what I've written, since for the last 10, 15 years, beginning with my novel In the Time of the Others, which is set during the Liberation War of 71, and then my consciousness kind of coming to terms with, over the years, having grown up with those stories, and then in my living memory, for example, seeing the establishment of these crimes tribunals, which are in and of themselves, full of complexities of politics and narrative and agendas, what have you. And they were established in 2010, and I've been following as best as possible what's been going on with them. I had been when this story was written several years ago. They were more active and more fresh, both in the news that I followed and in how I was thinking of them. So based on those things, how does one kind of really capture these really momentous and major issues that run through books that we write, whether they're novels, whether they're stories. This one I chose, as I said, because it is about power dynamics. It's about agency. It's about who has voice and who doesn't. It's about how so much of what keeps the wheels motioned and it keeps the wheels in motion and running in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, in a system that is rife with greased palms and corrupt practices. And if you can't drop 5 names within the first 5 sentences you speak, no one is going to listen to you. And Shamshir Ali knows that. He knows that. He knows that he can live out the rest of his days trying to get justice. Not going to happen until he brings fear and connection along with him.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for that reading.
Thank you.
Sanjena, please share with us a little bit of Gold Diggers and tell us why you are sharing this.
Sure. So I'll read from the first chapter. The narrator, Neil Narayan, is 15 years old in this section. When I was younger, Anita and Anjali Dayal were held in perfectly fine favor at my house. Our two families mingled pleasantly. As a latchkey kid whose mother was less prolific in the kitchen than Anita's, I often let myself into the Dayal's house to rummage around in the fridge. The key beneath the watering can behind the azalea bush was mine to use. Our parents, the 4 brown adults in a largely white subdivision, collaborated to create a simulacrum of India in a reliably red Georgia county. But over the past few years, Anita's father, Pranesh uncle, had grown conspicuously absent, discomfiting the other Desi mothers. No one pronounced words like separation. It was stated only that Anita's father was working in California, where he had founded a company with his classmates from the prestigious Indian Institutes of Technology. The official reason for Anita's father living across the country while her mother remained in Hammond Creek was the daughter and a desire not to interrupt her schooling, which is why my mother was overtaken by a frisson of judgment when I came home at the end of May, weeks after spring fling, with the news that Anita would be leaving Okefenokee High School and, in fact, interrupting her schooling. California, my mother said. I could almost see the Remax Realty signs in her eyes as she dreamt of an open house, overdone chewy sugar cookies and fruit punch and information on the neighborhood's property values. My mother adored open houses, their mild festivity, the red balloons, the way the houses were held in presentational limbo, vacuumed carpets and potpourri in the powder rooms, until the owner's current unsatisfactory life had been traded out for a better one. To Buckhead, I said. Anita had been accepted to a posh private school in Buckhead, one of the neighborhoods inside the perimeter. The perimeter, referring to Interstate 285, which neatly locked the suburbs away from Atlanta proper, was one of those things to which my mother sometimes mystically referred while in that open house headspace, a state of mind that I swear caused her very large ears to droop and soften, implying that she was listening to something otherworldly, something more splendid than terrestrial gossip. Someday we might live inside the perimeter, she suggested. My father scoffed. In Hammond Creek, we were close to my parents' jobs, good public schools, and other immigrants. Inside the perimeter, he grumbled, were crumbling houses that white people would spend $1 million on because they seemed Margaret Mitchellian. Anita's destination was a school I'd faced at debate tournaments a few times. They never failed to intimidate, showing up with 4 coaches from the best college teams huddled around them. They strutted about in blazers and ties and pearls and heels, while we mopped our sweat with our swamp green Okefenokee High School t-shirts. Her school sat near the long, low lawns of country clubs and the governor's mansion. Its female students would be debutantes, and its alumni seemed, from my position outside its brick-winged gates anyway, to waltz into Harvard and Princeton and Vanderbilt and Georgetown. It made sense. Anita's only plan in life, as long as I had known her, was to attend Harvard. What followed Harvard was a vaguely crimson-tinged blankness. Harvard was sufficient, would propel her into some life thereafter. The first step in achieving that life seemed to be leaving Hammond Creek, Okefenokee High School, and me.
Why this part for us?
Well, partially it's my 2.5 minute segment. So you got, when you're touring, you have your 6-minute readings and your 5-minute readings and whatnot. But I don't know, for thinking about place, I think I grew up thinking that my work as a writer of Indian origin had to sort of all be looking to the motherland, and I had to write about like the lush, the sort of lush landscape of Kerala, where my dad is from and where I have spent very little time in my life. And that was the way to be a South Asian author. But in fact, I grew up in a world full of malls and strip malls and highways and traffic. And these are no places. And I think that every writer has to do some grappling to realize that we're stuck with the places that we grew up. We're stuck with our own material. We're stuck with our own experiences. And once I accepted that, I realized that I could actually have quite a lot of fun writing about these no places, because of course, no places are in fact some places, because they contain the sort of ambitions and dreams and dramas of the people who come and settle into them. And the Atlanta suburbs suddenly became interesting enough to write about. And the same thing happened when I wrote the second half of the book, which is set in California.
Mm-hmm. I love your explanation of the no places and this has become some places, right? It makes me think about what some of you were saying earlier about the very specific of the local and what makes that, or can it become universal if it is so specific in that way, right? Great, thank you for that. Part of having everyone read is, of course, for us to get a sense of how place, space, and craft play out in your work, but it's also to hear the rhythm of your language, to hear the cadence of your words, right? So sometimes in Zoom, it's hard to get that. So if you need to take a moment, close your eyes a little bit, right? So you can just hear in a different way, please do. You're all invited to participate in a way that is best for you in the medium that we're in, right? Anuk, please. You'll be reading from A Passage North, yes?
Yeah, I'm just going to read the first paragraph of my book, because that way I don't have to give any explanatory context. And also because I suppose that the book is very tightly woven together. There are very few chapter breaks and paragraph breaks and sentence breaks. The text tries to be an uninterrupted engagement with the consciousness of a single character. So it's easiest to start at the beginning.
Yeah.
The present, we assume, is eternally before us, one of the few things in life from which we cannot be parted. It overwhelms us in the painful first moments of entry into the world, when it is still too new to be managed or negotiated, remains by our side during childhood and adolescence, in those years before the weight of memory and expectation. And so it is sad and a little unsettling to see that we become, as we grow older, much less capable of touching, grazing, or even glimpsing it. That the closest we seem to get to the present are those brief moments we stop to consider the spaces our bodies are occupying, the intimate warmth of the sheets in which we wake, the scratched surface of the window on a train taking us somewhere else, as if the only way we can hold time still is by trying physically to prevent the objects around us from moving. The present, we realize, eludes us more and more as the years go by, showing itself for fleeting moments before losing us in the world's incessant movement, fleeing the second we look away and leaving scarcely a trace of its passing. Or this, at least, is how it usually seems in retrospect, when in the next brief moment of consciousness, the next occasion we are able to hold things still, we realize how much time has passed since we were last aware of ourselves, when we realize how many days, weeks, and months have slipped by without our consent. Events take place, moods ebb and flow, people and situations come and go. But looking back during these rare junctures in which we are, for whatever reason, lifted up from the circular daydream of everyday life, we are slightly surprised to find ourselves in the places we are, as though we were absent while everything was happening, as though we were somewhere else during the time that is usually referred to as our life. Waking up each morning, we follow by circuitous routes the thread of habit, out of our homes, into the world, and back to our beds at night. Move unseeingly through familiar paths, one day giving way to another and 1 week to the next, so that when in the midst of this daydream something happens and the thread is finally cut, when in a moment of strong desire or unexpected loss, the rhythms of life are interrupted, we look around and are quietly surprised to see that the world is vaster than we thought, as if we'd been tricked or cheated out of all that time that in retrospect appears to have contained nothing of substance, no change and no duration, time that has come and gone but left us somehow untouched.
That's a hell of a first paragraph. No? There's a tenseness and a terseness to it. It's telescopic in its language, and yet it's very, very place and space-based. It's doing a lot. Why are you choosing to, I don't want to ask you why you're choosing this because you said that earlier, but can you say a little bit about what this, asking a craft question, why do you write like this? What does, what offers, what is on offer when we read you?
Well, I understand what you mean when you ask why I chose this paragraph to start with. Well, I didn't want to lie to the reader or mislead the reader into believing that there was a story worth listening to in this novel, or characters that were presented, or their worlds that were being presented. This novel is a series of it moves constantly between the perceptions of a narrator who is attending a funeral, who doesn't act, who is only responding to the situation that he finds himself in. It moves constantly between this character's perceptions and certain thoughts and memories. The external world is kind of like a kind of background or scenery, in the context of which the drama of this character's mind is unfolded. And I thought it was, in a way, I thought it was important for this to be clear right at the beginning of, for it to be clear the nature of this book, that this book is really a kind of series of reflections that have been placed in a kind of extended narrative.
As I was engaging with your work, I think it kept on thinking like ruminations pieced together with a historical backdrop, but it's really in this character's mind that so much of the drama is playing out, no? Thank you. What a heterogeneous group of writers you are, such different voices that we're hearing today. Thank you. Sonia, please tell us a little bit from Unmarriageable.
I'll read two short passages, one from the very beginning, and then one from further in, just to give a flavor, but also to reflect our theme today. So okay, I actually was invited to do the audible reading for Unmarriageable, which should not be a reflection of how I'm going to read today. When I'm reading live, I get a little weirded out. So the audible, the acting and everything is, I've been told it's good. So not to worry if you decide to hear Unmarriageable on audible. Okay.
Yeah, just channel Mira, you'll be fine. Yeah.
Mira is an actress. I had to rely on my vocal, whatever Audible saw in me when they invited me. So, Chapter 1. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a girl can go from pauper to princess or princess to pauper in the mere seconds it takes for her to accept a proposal. When Elizabeth Binnett began working at age 20 as the English literature teacher at the British School of Dilipabad, she had thought it would be a temporary solution to the sudden turn of fortune that had seen Mr. Barkat Bark Binnett and Mrs. Khushbu Pinky Binnett and their 5 daughters, Janesba, Elizabeth, Mirisba, Kitiara, and Lady, moved from big city Lahore to backwater Dilipabad. But here she was, 10 years later, 30 years old, and still in the job she'd grown to love despite its challenges. Her new batch of 9th graders was starting Pride and Prejudice, and their first homework had been to rewrite the opening sentence of Jane Austen's novel, always a fun activity and a good way for her to get to know her students better. After Alice took attendance, she opened a fresh box of multicolored chalks and invited the girls to share their sentences on the blackboard. The first to jump up was Rose Nama, a crusader for duty and decorum, and one of the more trying students. Rose Nama deliberately bypassed the colored chalks for a plain white one, and Alice braced herself for a reimagined sentence exalting a traditional life, marriage, children, death. As soon as Rose Nama ended, with mere seconds it takes for her to accept a proposal, the class erupted into cheers, for it was true. A ring did possess magical powers to transform into pauper or princess. Rose Nama gave a curtsy and, glancing defiantly at Alice, returned to her desk. Good job, Alice said. Who wants to go next? As hands shot up, she looked affectionately at the girls at their wooden desks, their winter uniforms impeccably washed and pressed by dhobis and maids, their long braids, for good girls did not get a boyish cut like Alice's, draped over their books, and she wondered who they'd end up becoming by the end of high school. She recalled herself at their age, and eager to learn, though ultimately naive, Miss Know-It-All. Miss Alice, me, the class clown said, pumping her hand energetically. Alice nodded, and the girl selected a blue chalk and began to write. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a young girl in possession of a pretty face, a fair complexion, a slim figure, and good height is not going to happily settle for a very ugly husband if he doesn't have enough money, unless she has the most incredible bad luck, which my cousin does. Okay, so that's from the beginning. Now I'm going to shift into reading something which is also thematically reflective of our panel. So this is a conversation between my counterparts of Darcy, Mr. Darcy, and Elizabeth Bennet in my novel Valentine Darcy and Elizabeth Bennett. Here Darcy starts. I see you read more than Reader's Digest and Good Housekeeping, Darcy said. My mother read books one after the other, as if they were potato chips. Oh, Alice reads like that, Jenna said, as she took the water Bungles insisted she drink. I love to read Valentine. Hammy rose to hover between Darcy and Alice. I'm the world's biggest bookworm. Alice began to separate the books into two groups. Darcy glanced at the titles. For one of your classes, he asked. Analogous literatures, Alice said. I'm pairing Ruqayya Sakhawat Hussein's Sultana's Dream with Charlotte Perkin Gilman's Herland for Utopias, Khushwant Singh's Train to Pakistan with John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath for family stories, alternating with socio-pastoral chapters, Gloria Naylor's The Women of Brewster Place with Krishan Chandra's short story Mahalakshmi Kapur, comparing women's lives, and Ian Forster's A Passage to India with Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird for similar racial issues and court cases. Darcy said, I've read Wrath and Mockingbird. He skimmed A Passage to India. I haven't read much local literature. Not that Passage is local per se, though it's up for debate whether it's the nationality of the author or the geography of the book that determines its place in a country's canon. Val, Hammy gave him her most dazzling smile. Have you read Love Story? It's really short and belongs everywhere, for love knows no boundaries. She sighed theatrically. Love transcends country and geography. Alice and Darcy both gave Hammy equally amused glances. I believe, Alice said to Darcy, a book and an author can belong to more than one country or culture. English came with the colonizers, but its literature is part of Pakistani heritage too, as is pre-partition writing. Darcy said, my favorite partition novel is Atiyah Hussein's Sunlight on a Broken Column. Have you read it, Alice? Alice shook her head. Darcy said, that book made me believe I could have a Pakistani identity inclusive of an English-speaking tongue. We've been forced to seek ourselves in the literature of others for too long. Alice nodded, adding, but reading widely can lead to an appreciation of the universalities across cultures. Sure, Darcy said, but it shouldn't just be a one-sided appreciation. I know what you mean, Alice said. Ginger ale and apple pie have become second natures to us here, while our culture is viewed as exotic. Precisely, Darcy said. At the wedding, you talked of a Pakistani Jane Austen, but will we ever hear the English or Americans, etc., talk of an equivalent? Let's hope so, Alice said. You teach Austen, right? Darcy said. My mother adored Darcy. Oh my God, babes, I love Mr. Darcy, Hammy squealed, especially the part with his wet shirt. I could read that scene all day. Alice and Darcy's eyes met. Darcy is overrated, Alice said. Mr. Knightley from Emma won my heart when he defended Miss Bates from Emma's mockery. I see. Darcy pointed to a bookmark book. What are you reading right now? Alice said, Virginia Woolf's To the Lighthouse.
Okay. Sonia, why did you choose these two passages to juxtapose and read for us today?
So this novel is completely set in Pakistan, and it takes place in all the major cities: Lahore, Karachi, Quetta, Peshawar, etc., Islamabad. It's a quintessentially Pakistani novel, even though it's a retelling of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. And it's a parallel retelling, by which I mean it follows the plot, and all the characters from the source material are there. And the first chapter, I wanted it to mirror the source material also, but yet situate it. And I use situate purposefully within Pakistani space. And the first chapter, in fact, all the students, quite a few of them, reinterpret the first sentence from Austen's novel into Pakistani space, as well as give the themes of the novel, which is marriage and class and social mobility and everything that we find in Pakistan right now, the role of religion and what it means and doesn't mean. And one thing I wanted to do with Unmarriageable was, often with Pakistani novels, sometimes I feel that they tend to be written from the space and point of view of one particular class, the one that tends to speak English, or we shift immediately to, a certain other class. Whereas the dialogues or the spaces between middle classes, but the upper middle class, the lower middle class, etc., and the middle class, which is a growing class in Pakistan, I would say, we tend not to see that much. And in Unmarriageable, I wanted to show the friendships or not between these three classes, these broadening middle classes, and what that means in terms of linguistic divides, of which English and Urdu and the regional languages play a very huge part in Pakistan itself. And this and Dilipabad, where the novel, where my binnets come from, is actually a fictional space. It's my fictional city. And it's exemplary of the smaller cities in Pakistan, the smaller towns, the more industrial towns, which yet encompass large spaces and small spaces. And the second reading, I think, is self-explanatory for a post-colonial novel. I wanted to, my Alice and my Darcy characters are what are known as third culture kids. Both of them have spent some of their formative years as children outside of Pakistan, and then they return to Pakistan. So they're seeing Pakistan objectively as well as subjectively. So it's theirs and yet not theirs in many ways, but they have a strong sense of belonging. The novel isn't about are they Pakistani and are they not or whatever. They're very much, they know they're Pakistani, they know they're from wherever they've grown up, lived, whatever, but they find their sense of place within books and within the characters. And one quote that everyone seems to love a lot from Unmarriageable is people come into our lives in order to recommend books, because people come and go and come and go. And Unmarriageable is very much about friendships between different people and what that means. So yeah, I thought of reading these two with our panel in mind.
Thank you. Like I shared earlier, there is such a heterogeneity of voice, subject matter, what place not only you're writing about, but also the place of writing, the place of, as you say, Sonia, the place of a book in terms of its relationships, right, in this work. I think of Neil from The Gold Diggers and kind of his lackluster sense of himself in so many ways, juxtaposed with maybe Anuk, your narrator, your main character, and these two fellows are in such different spaces, psychologically, as well as geographically, right? So I'm just kind of, it's a very interesting conversation for me to have read all of your works recently. So all of your voices and characters are very much in my head, and I'm seeing lots of connections in my mind as we have this conversation today. We've got a couple of minutes left. We've got about, say, 15 or so minutes left. And there's some really interesting questions that we've been asked here in the Q&A. I want to just raise some of them. We've spoken about this a little bit here, right? There's a question about our understanding of diaspora based on location, right? There's some discussion of, do you see yourself as post-colonial writers writing back? What are some of the politics of writing back to a center, right? Question specifically for Ayesha, what are your thoughts on the two diasporas you mentioned, the one from India to Pakistan, and then from Pakistan to Canada? Are there differences and similarities in the feelings behind each move? A question specifically for Anuk, what are your observations of the rhythms of life healing? Do they bury you further in grief? Does writing come to your rescue? Question specifically for Mira, right? One often says that the more local the story is, the more universal it is. What are your thoughts on this? So I'll just leave it a little bit open right now.
I see the post-colonial question was actually, I think, for Nadeem and myself, and it says, do you see yourselves as post-colonial writers writing back? I mean, writing back to the center. My quick answer will be, what exactly is that center and who determines that, you know? I know traditionally we're supposed to see the center as some, I don't know, depends on, once again, where you are and how you've grown up perhaps and what you're looking to in writing back. If you've grown up predominantly in one country, is that the center? Or if you're looking at it from a publishing point of view, is somewhere else the center? And if so, who has made you think that or believe that? And I think Anu had brought up something about audience in the very beginning, and I think it speaks to that also. Who is your audience? Who are you writing for? I mean, for me, Unmarriageable it's a Pakistani novel. It's written for Pakistanis. And so I'm always very delighted when people across the world say that it's just like their family and they see themselves in it and it's them. That's an amazingly pleasant space to be, which tells me that maybe sometimes these centers are artificially created, these post-colonial centers, because who is creating them also, right? The publishing world, or who's deciding this is the center, this is where if you get published and you win awards and this, that, and the other, then you're an important writer or a writer who has something important to say. Who's deciding these things, and why are we all sort of feeding into that? So some of the questions I think about when I'm asked about the center and what that means.
Yeah, great, thank you. Nadeem, please.
Yeah, thank you. Teaching post-colonial literature, these questions are at the forefront of my mind constantly. And as for this idea of the center, one of the things I investigate and talk about with students is that, the center, that one of the running threads in the post-colonial space is the center being disrupted constantly by the periphery and by the margins, and that's how plurality happens. That's how voices come in and kind of disrupt what is being turned into a mainstream narrative. And so, do I see myself as a post-colonial writer writing back? I don't know that I can claim that. I think being in one headspace of investigating that as a reader and to a great extent a critic, kind of keeps me busy. And again, being a writer, to be constantly kind of boxed into this kind of writer or that kind of writer, especially being based in the U.S. and having, for at least the last 15 years, as far as the publishing industry goes, kind of trying to find my space within that, it's really kind of, it's demoralizing. It takes the focus away from the actual work that I'm trying to do, which is just telling stories, which happen to be set in a specific place, that is Dhaka, that is Bangladesh, but that I would like to be read both with an attention to the specificity, but also as anybody would read any other novel, that's written by any author. Now, white authors are never put on the spot that we are put on. If 5 white authors were writing about World War II, all of them would get different attentions and their World War II. But God forbid Sonia and I should write a World War II novel, in which 2 characters from the subcontinent are showing a trajectory and kind of showing that no, Britain did not win the World War II. The British Empire won it for them. If we did that, Sonia's book comes out in April. Mine, will say, no, well, maybe April 2032. By then, we'll have worked out our quota of South Asian representation in World War II novels. So given that, I think the odds are already really weirdly scaffolded and stacked against us. And the best I can do at this point is to kind of say, okay, well, here's the book I wrote. Here is the center that, if I must speak to, clearly publishing industry, USA, you're telling me, so how about I shift my center, which I did, to the subcontinent and say that, let me write again for the people who really have engaged with the book outside of anything else. But at the same time going, oh my goodness, this is a book I can identify with, because believe me, the first time that struck me, whether it was reading Midnight's Children or The God of Small Things or any number of authors, Anita Desai, any number of people with whom I could identify, that changed how I wrote and how I saw my space of writing. So I think they've already done the great job of being of writing back. So I can only learn and keep learning.
The politics of this panel are also kind of interesting, right? I mean, we are come together under the auspices of South Asian literature, but again, as I've mentioned several times, the range and scope of your work, how is it categorizable as South Asian? except that it is somehow linking with a larger history. Does that bring us all together in some way? Is it because that some of us are part of diasporas, or some of us have had opportunities to be in multiple places at once? Does that bring this group of 6 diverse writers together into this category? Thoughts? Anuk, I think you were going to say something a moment ago, no? Well, go ahead. I already called on you. Go ahead.
Your question is about how we relate to each other as diasporas.
Sure, you can take it in that direction.
Did you have another direction in mind?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, everyone is smiling. Did you mean something else? Did you ask another question?
No.
Okay. I think we're all very different, obviously. I don't recognize the categories that are often used in the United States, so in the UK, brown and so on and so forth. Nor do I use the category South Asian generally. I'm Tamil. It's an identity that is linguistic, and in a way, like, I think as a diaspora that is defined by war, I guess I would see the historical experience of our community as maybe there's more that resonates in the experience of the Eritrean freedom struggle, or the Kurdish freedom struggle, or the Kashmiri freedom struggle than specifically South Asian, or specifically or broadly brown, which is obviously a way of seeing things that masks a lot of hidden inequalities of caste and region and so on and so forth.
Right.
I think we are obviously from a certain part of the world, and there's a kind of family resemblance between all of cultures that stretch from Afghanistan to Bhutan, and from Nepal to Sri Lanka. But I don't know. I guess there are different frameworks in which we can view our similarities and our differences, and it also has to do with what we want to emphasize. And with me, it's the experience of war, and it's the experience of diaspora, specifically as a refugee diaspora.
Ayesha, contribute. What comes up for you as you hear this?
I think that's just so interesting, what Anuk is saying right now, and I'm just sort of lost in thinking about that. I think I'll try to link it to the other question of the double diaspora also. In a way, I think it is like we're all negotiating historical processes, a set of historical processes that we maybe share a generation ago. And in a way, I think that maybe I wonder if we're writing, all of us, in the wreckage of colonialism, which, is not like a ruin. Like, Anna Singh shows us that a ruin is not a place where everything dies. Actually, there's another life that becomes possible at the site of ruins. And so I wonder if that's part of what a lot of us are negotiating with in various ways. I definitely think that the reason I like to think about like the double diaspora with my family's history anyways, from India to Pakistan and Pakistan to Canada, is that my parents, it was like war that led them from India to Pakistan. Like, they did not make this move happily or by their choice. And so it was war and fear that motivated them, and the way the colonists divided the country before they left, and the ways that we all participated in it as well. And then, because they were like, my parents did not come to Canada as refugees. They were lower class in Pakistan, lower economic class, and actually couldn't find a way to make a living. And so their intention when they came to Canada was very much about returning, like to come to make enough money to go back. And so I talk in the book about the dream of return, and they tried to move back 4 times with us in tow. And so it was a very interesting process of constantly trying to go back and not wanting to be in the place that they were in. And I think, and then the funny thing to me, or the interesting thing to me when I was writing this book, was realizing, well, each of them only lived in Pakistan for less than 20 years. And somehow they're from Pakistan, and then I'm like their child from Pakistan, so it's sort of like I'm part of the diaspora of a nation state. that's so recently created and in which my parents mostly did not spend their lives at all. Like they spent most of their lives outside of it. So just these questions they're really interesting to me.
Mm. Sanjena, your work is exploring this from another angle of diaspora, right? What comes up for you as you hear our colleagues speak?
Sorry, I lost the mute button. Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's always interesting to sort of find all of the little groupings you can put people into, put literatures into, and I think so often people settle on the ethnicity grouping or the regional grouping. But I feel like that doesn't leave a lot of space for the aesthetic groupings. And I think especially, I found just in kind of my first book tour experience in like festivals or panels where that are not only South Asian, I am often on a panel that is like the POC panel. And it seems like it's sort of automatic. It's maybe a choice that festival directors sort of make intuitively. But it then means that a lot of the conversation focuses on one area of which I think is of interest to a lot of the writers who I've been on these panels with, which is we are interested in identity. But I did an event with Karan Mahajan, whose work I really love. And he said that like he had to like read my book for it. And I think he had read some of the reviews before actually reading the book. And once he read it, he was like, I had no idea what your sentences were like based on all of the reviews. He was like, I had no idea what the prose was like. I had a sense that maybe you thought humor was important, but like your orientation to your subject matter was not at all evident in many of the reviews and the profiles. And I thought that was interesting. I think that how we orient ourselves toward place has as much to do with the choices we make on a sentence level, because those are sort of ideology. Those are your worldview. So my prose has more in common in a lot of ways with like Philip Roth and kind of neurotic Jewish writers than it does with plenty of South Asian writers. And I think we should feel free to pick and choose and kind of develop our own aesthetic that is apart from our ethnicity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Mira, what comes up for you?
Yeah, that actually really resonates with me because my favorite writer is this gay British writer in his 60s, Alan Hollinghurst, who wrote this terrifically funny and beautiful book called The Line of Beauty, which is set in the Thatcher era in the 80s in England. And he writes about class very sort of acutely and very perceptively, and sexuality. And those are two of the themes that I'm really interested in. And yes, I've written about urban contemporary Pakistan. I've written about the roads and sights and sounds and smells of Lahore and Karachi and Islamabad. But they are so deeply inflected at the sentence level by this book that I've read 5 times. And I think it's the most times I've read any book. I think The God of Small Things is number 2, which is interesting because then that's all Kerala and India. But yeah, I think it's, you have to, going back to the early question about also locality, you just have to write your truth. And in terms of craft, I usually begin with an image, and that image expands to build a universe that then encompasses the sensibility of my characters. And I don't really think in order to write, I write so that I may know what it is that I think. I think I've always been very honest about that. I don't usually know what I'm going to write until I have vomited something on the page, and then I sort of go through it and think, oh, this is what I'm actually interested in. There's a kind of slow dredging up of the subconscious. So get to your truth, however that is. I think if it's in the local, that's great. If you're conversing across cultures, that's your sort of undertaking, that's your inheritance, that is your mode of curiosity. And there are a lot of writers who are idea-based writers who have this big idea and then they write a novel based on that. I am not necessarily that. I write character-driven. My book is very character-driven. I think character often distilled becomes plot. That is the engine of my fiction. And so for me, the locality is a second thought. It's just, I write what I'm interested in. I grew up in Lahore. I have lived here all my life, with the exception of, sort of higher education. And so I am very rooted in middle class culture in Pakistan because I'm an actor. And so I'm on set and I interact with people from all parts of Pakistan. And so I'm hyper vigilant. Even when the camera's on me, I'm like looking around, hearing voices, and the writer in me is sort of hyper vigilant, even when I'm supposed to be the vessel. And so that's just sort of a summary of my own influences. I think you just have to write your truth. And one last thing is that, Sanjena talked about our various identities and how some of them can be confining and we don't even realize that they are. And we're sort of, there's a lot of cross-fertilization that happens across influences. But I will say that, I think my identity as a woman is a capacious identity. I think my identity as a Pakistani also, contrary to what the Pakistani state would have me believe, is a capacious identity. I think my identity as an actor is a huge identity. I think my identity as a writer and as somebody whose father went to prison 3 times because he wrote against the state is also a big identity. So I think you just have to go with your own truth. And I think the hardest thing is to figure out what your truth is.
That's a beautiful way to end and close our time together, right? Finding paths to our own truth through writing and other journeys of ours. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation with all of you, Nadeem and Anuk, Sanjena, Mira, Sonia, Ayesha. Thank you, Tasveer, for convening us together for this panel, Space, Place, and Craft. I'm Anu, and thank you. Thank you for a very beautiful conversation together. Alka, do you